Hey, what's up guys? Real estate broker Michael Watkins here, and I'm gonna dive right into a video that I came across last week that seems to be making the rounds. I saw it last week, but then I saw it again on national broadcast cable networks. I heard it on satellite radio, so it seems to be getting a lot of attention. So I just wanna give some commentary on this video because a lot of people are confounded about how something like this is even possible. So let me just go ahead and play the video to bring you guys up to speed so you see what it's about.
This is my house, this is my life, Sam. This is my house.
When Tracy and Miles Albert purchased this beautiful 4-bedroom house in Riverside, they never realized that at the end of escrow, the seller would suddenly refuse to give up the keys and leave.
Get out of here! You!
Everybody just is blown away by the fact that this could happen.
Every single I was dotted, every T was crossed, everything was agreed to.
Chris Taylor is the real estate agent who sold the house to Tracy and Miles from a man who wanted to sell immediately.
He needed $560,000 from the sale of his house in the next 2 weeks, and he called me on a Sunday. So in traditional real estate, there's no way of doing that unless the buyer's a cash buyer.
Since the house was free and clear and worth more than $560,000, Tracy and Miles felt it was a great deal.
Which took us scrambling to get everything we had, our life savings, put it together, hard money loan on top of it to make that happen.
During escrow, they discovered there was a $30,000 tax lien on the house, which slowed things down. But in the end, all parties signed on the dotted line and the sale was completed.
We own the house outright, and it's our house.
It's just draining emotionally and financially. It's just very tough.
Hi Sam, I'm Gina Silva with Fox 11 News. I'd like to speak with you.
Even though we saw lights and heard people inside the house, no one would come to the door.
It's genuinely unfathomable to me that we live in a state where something like this is even possible. They closed escrow on this home January 31st of 2020.
All three have contacted authorities and tried to get the seller evicted. But because of the pandemic,
Have it fall under a COVID tenant situation of no evictions when it doesn't fall under that at all. This transaction went through in January 2020 before any of that. It isn't a renter who's getting thrown out. It's a guy who collected all of this money.
This year alone, we've handled at least about 7, maybe 8 cases of this exact type of situation.
eviction attorney Dennis Block says people purchasing a house need to be extremely cautious, especially if they notice any red flags during the process. Block says what's happening to this couple could happen to anyone.
So this person is not a tenant. It's a previous owner who's enjoying the benefits of the funds that were transferred to his account, but of course now doesn't want to move out of the premises that he no longer owns.
The Alberts filed an unlawful detainer, but because of the California eviction moratorium, the case has been stalled. Time is simply passing by, and the immaculate house they fell in love with is now becoming an eyesore.
Tried watering the lawn one time. He came out and ripped my sprinkler lines, ripped all the wires off. The palm trees are dying. This was immaculate when we purchased this house. It was beautiful. And now everything's dying.
It just seems unbelievable that you look at it and go, so you can just steal someone's life savings and then commit fraud and do all these things and there's just nothing to be done about it.
There's 3 main precautions that could have avoided this, right? And I'm gonna play the video and stop so I can give some commentary to you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. So the first thing is that escrow, the buyer's escrow funds, was released to the seller before keys and possession were taken by the buyer, right? I would never allow that to happen if I were representing those buyers, right? One of the first things I do, first of all, let me back up a little bit. So one of the first things I do when I'm representing a buyer in a transaction where the seller is occupying the residence, the property that's being sold, is I am constantly checking with the listing agent or the buyer to see if they've already moved out, right? Because that can obviously become a problem, right? I'm checking A week before, as we're getting closer to the closing date, I'm checking to see if they've moved out. Hey, if you're buying another house, have you closed on that house yet? When are you going to be out of the property? Because you don't want someone in a property 2 days, 3 days before you're set to close. That's a red flag.
Every single I was dotted, every T was crossed, everything was agreed to.
Chris Taylor is the real estate agent who sold the house to Tracy and Miles from a man who wanted to sell immediately.
All right, and you see how, earnest this agent sounds, and this is not an indictment on him or, trying to bash him at all, but this guy represents the seller, right? If you're a buyer and you're not represented by a broker, understand that when you go to purchase a house, if you're a buyer, or if you're a seller, if you're selling a house and your buyer is represented by a broker, that agent's loyalty is to their client, right? And in this case, this agent, as I'm sure he feels bad about it, but at the end of the day, while that transaction was happening, he represented the seller, not the buyer. I mean, he has a duty, and he's licensed in California. I'm sure the rules, of engagement, so to speak, are not that different. But understand, he represents the other party, right? I'm sure no one expected that this was going to happen, but keep that in mind, guys. The agent, if you don't have an agent of your own, that agent, that broker, is working first and foremost on behalf of their client.
Since the house was free and clear and worth more than $560,000, Tracy and Miles felt it was a great deal.
Which took us scrambling to get everything we had, our life savings, put it together, hard money loan on top of it to make that happen.
All right, number two, right? The number two problem I see here that could have prevented this is a walkthrough, right? On the day of closing, usually if closing scheduled at, let's say, 10 a.m., you would meet at the property, let's say at 9 a.m., do a walkthrough, right? Make sure everything's the same as it was before. Make sure no items that were supposed to still be in the house, like maybe appliances or, furniture, if you agreed to, purchase the home with furniture, make sure those were not removed. That's the purpose of a walkthrough. You do a walkthrough, number one, to make sure that the people still aren't living there, right? There's no one still occupying the premises, right? Or still in the property, living in the property, and make sure that everything's the way you remember it. Everything is the way you agreed to purchase it, right? All the fixtures, it could be a chandelier, it could be furniture, it could be kitchen appliances, whatever it may be. You do a walkthrough to make sure everything is still the same. Everything, you look around, you say, you know what, everything looks exactly as I remembered it. Everything looks the way I agreed to purchase it. Let's move forward. And then you go to the title company or to your attorney, wherever the closing is going to happen, and execute the purchase and sign all your documents.
During escrow, they discovered there was a $30,000 tax lien on the house, which slowed things down. But in the end, all parties signed on the dotted line and the sale was completed.
All right, so you hear them talk about a tax lien on the property here, and that's not necessarily a red flag. It's pretty common, right? Usually, a buyer will be buying a house, and when the title company does a title search, they'll discover that there's either a second mortgage or there might be a tax lien, like in the case of this property. And yeah, it's usually not a big deal, because what happens is if there's a lien or if there's any kind of encumbrances on the deed or the title to that property, it has to be taken care of. It has to be satisfied out of the proceeds, out of seller proceeds, right? Out of whatever monies that the sellers are going to get from the sale. You have to satisfy and convey a free and clear title to the buyer. A lot of people commented that, the fact that it had a tax lien on it should have been a red flag. Not necessarily. It's pretty common to do a transaction where there's some sort of lien that has to be satisfied upon closing.
This year alone, we've handled at least about 7, maybe 8 cases of this exact type of situation.
Eviction attorney Dennis Block says people purchasing a house need to be extremely cautious, especially if they notice any red flags during the process.
All right, so now to the crux of how this is even possible. Keep in mind, we're in this pandemic, and there was a federal order of a moratorium on evictions, right? So that's part of how this guy is getting away with this, because essentially, once those buyers sign that they own the property, the closing's done, they effectively now become landlords. Even though the supposed tenant is the guy who just sold the property, he's a tenant. And now the new buyers, right? Now the owners are landlords who need to evict, right? You have to, and I see the comments, people saying, well, I just get some of my buddies to come kick the door down and drag this guy out and get rid of him and all this other stuff. And listen, believe it or not, as frustrating as this might sound, you would be in the wrong. Because if there's an eviction moratorium, it means you cannot kick that person out, especially since, the pandemic and this federal eviction moratorium that was enacted. And furthermore, in California, I'm licensed in the state of Florida, but in certain states, there might be even more stringent restrictions on evictions. It's really difficult to evict a tenant, and that's the loophole that this guy is using, right? So they went to court. You saw the attorney tell you, hey, we've got a few of these cases happening, and that's what, unfortunately, some of these sellers are using to then, take people's money, and it should be a crime, right? It's ridiculous. Like, anyways, let's stick to what the law says, right? They go to court, you file an eviction, and if there's a moratorium, or in California, if there's a state moratorium, then guess what? You've got to go through the process, or you might not be able to evict that person for who knows how long until that moratorium is lifted. And number 3, here's what this comes down to. They were not represented by a realtor or a real estate broker. That's what it comes down to. I mean, unfortunately, that's what it is, right? A professional real estate broker would have caught so many of these red flags, right? The releasing of escrow before, keys and possession were transferred. Not doing a walkthrough, right? Walking the property and making sure it's what you agreed to purchase before you actually sign the documents, right? And being represented, right? As a layman, as someone who doesn't buy homes or deal with real estate transactions every day, right? The trained eye is going to be able to catch things that you can't catch, right? And that's what you hire a real estate broker to do, is to protect your interest, right? So guys, this one's an interesting one. This one, I hate the way it went down. I feel for those buyers. I hope it gets worked out for them eventually, but real estate is a big deal, guys. A lot of times you see so many for sale by owners, you see folks who think, they can do it on their own. And it's not an indictment on you if you, try to do it on your own. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys are smart, but, we do this stuff day in, day out. So, we're here to protect you. If you hire a real estate broker like myself, as the person who's going to represent you, we can catch things like this that can turn out to be an absolute nightmare for you. All right. So guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a good day.